Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Shir Hever in Heidelberg, Germany. Today, April 17th, is the Palestinian Prisoner Day. Nearly 1 in every 4 Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip has been arrested, detained, or imprisoned by the Israeli military and police. Imprisonment has become a symbol for Palestinian life under Israeli occupation. This year, as the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian West Bank and Gaza Strip turns 50 years old, the Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails are launching a mass hunger strike. The hunger strike begins today on Palestinian Prisoner Day and will include over 1,000 Palestinian political prisoners. Hunger strikes are a tool of resistance used by the prisoners to protest the conditions of their incarceration, the discrimination against Palestinian prisoners who are disadvantaged in access to family visits, and of course to the very fact of imprisonment of thousands of Palestinians whose only crime was to protest the Israeli military occupation and demand freedom. Back in 2013, we interviewed Gavin Kelly, the former advocacy coordinator of the Palestinian prisoners' rights organization, Adameer.
You know, when we talk about April 17th and Palestinian Prisoners Day, we're talking about the hunger strikes, but we need to kind of look at it from a bigger picture. I mean, even though the prisoners are confined to their cells, they have the ability to inspire and mobilize the masses like very few others. If we look at the ongoing protests around Palestine, a lot of that inspiration came from the prisoners and the sacrifices that they have made. I mean, so it's very. I mean, I think the prisoners have a huge amount of influence not only confined to their cells, but outside, as has been shown, and hopefully that will continue to be the case.
According to recent Adameer publications, there are currently 6,300 Palestinian political prisoners in Israeli jails. 500 of them are administrative detainees who do not even have charges pressed against them. 61 are female prisoners, and 300 are child prisoners. Out of the Palestinian Legislative Council, the Palestinian Parliament, 12 members are currently imprisoned by Israel. Here to join us to speak about this is Sahar Francis. Sahar Francis is the General Director of the Ramallah-based Adameer Prisoner Support and Human Rights Association since 2006. Adameer is a Palestinian NGO providing legal and advocacy support to Palestinian political prisoners in Israeli and Palestinian prisons. Sahar Francis is an attorney with a record as a human rights lawyer and over 20 years of human rights experience. Sahar Francis was on board of the Defense for Children International and sits on the board of the Union of Agricultural Work Committees. Thank you very much for joining us, Sahar.
Hello.
So let's start with the hunger strike. The media is saying that Marwan Barghouti from the Fatah party is the one who called for the strike. Is that true? And what are the demands of the strikers?
Yes, of course. As you mentioned, Marwan Barghouti is initiating this step, but of course, Marwan wouldn't be the only prisoner that would join this hunger strike. Since 2012, actually, the last massive hunger strike, when the prisoners guaranteed some of the rights, the basic rights, but since then, actually, the Israeli prison authority is denying these rights and putting more restrictions on the daily life of the prisoners. So this is what caused the need for another massive hunger strike in order to guarantee family visits, education, ending the policy of isolation, getting more education and more needs on the daily level. This is only actually the last resort and the only tool that the prisoners use in order to guarantee such basic rights under the system.
Yeah, it should be clarified for our viewers that while Israeli prisoners are allowed to pursue their education within prisons, Palestinians have lost that right in 2006. But I think many of our viewers also don't realize that there is a double legal system in the occupied territory, one for Israelis and one for Palestinians. Can you give us an example of this kind of injustice? For example, what kind of offense a Palestinian would go to jail for an extended period of time, while an Israeli in the same area would be tried differently?
Of course, as you mentioned at the beginning, since the 50 years of occupation, Israel implemented two different legal systems in the occupied territories. The military court system actually is applying just for the Palestinian people in the occupied territories, and based on this system. For example, throwing stones could be for several months, even for years for the Palestinians, where in Israel it is still a crime. But for example, if a settler or an Israeli citizen throws stones on police, or like we saw in Amona evacuation, the settlement evacuation, all those that they were throwing objects and stones, they were never prosecuted. And if they would be prosecuted as settlers, they wouldn't be subjected to the military court system. They would be brought inside Israel for the civil system.
Right. And, this is, of course, not the first hunger strike undertaken by Palestinian prisoners. There's been quite a lot of them, and some of them were quite famous and drew a lot of attention. But in 2015, the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, passed a new law. Now they enable the force feeding of hunger striking prisoners to feed them by force with tubes. So are the prisoners concerned that this will undermine the protest and will sabotage the hunger strike?
Of course, since July 2015, actually, after confirming this force feeding bill, it is a really dangerous tool that the use of hunger strike is accompanied with this threat of the force feeding that the prison authority now can use easier than before. Of course, they never used it till now. We had lots of individual hunger strikes in these years, but we didn't reach the point where they used the force feeding. But of course, we are afraid that they can use it anytime after having it legalized via the Knesset in 2015. Unfortunately, the High Court as well in Israel rejected the petitions against this force feeding bill. So we don't know yet what the decision of the court would be in such cases. The good and the thing that gives a bit hope that the doctors' union in Israel is against the force feeding, and they considered it as a torture, so they refused to implement force feeding till now, and hopefully that no doctor in Israel will agree to implement force feeding at the end of the day.
Yeah, of course, the United Nations considers force feeding of hunger strikers to be a form of torture, and many doctors in Israel are aware of that. But one thing I wanted to ask you about, before Palestinian Prisoner Day, in the last couple of weeks and months, Israeli forces have been rounding up a very large number of Palestinians. Actually, 6,000 prisoners is above the average of the last couple of years. And now the Israeli media is posting that 500 Palestinians more were arrested just in the last couple of weeks under various suspicions of terrorism and so on. But this is interesting because they are aware of the hunger strike and they're actually making the prisoners more powerful by arresting so many people. Does that make any sense? How do you understand this policy to make so many arrests just before the hunger strike?
Actually, these mass arrest campaigns were launched since almost more than 2 years under the argument that all these people are involved in incitement. This has become the trend in the last couple of years, arresting people for their social media activities, whether publishing things on Facebook or Twitter or in other social media, and they are arresting lots of activists from the ground, peaceful activists that they are joining the demonstrations against settlements and the wall and so on. So, of course, whenever they know that the prisoners are going to do such act of hunger strike, they can increase. And it's not just related to the hunger strike. I would say that it's related to the deal that we are expecting to take place between Hamas and the Israelis, like the one that took place in 2011, actually an exchange deal. So in order to put more pressure on the Hamas or the Palestinian Authority in any negotiations, they used to arrest hundreds of prisoners in order to increase the number that they can easily release, of course, to undermine the release of leaders like Marwan Barghouthi or other leaders, or those, for example, that they were rearrested after the release of 2011, claiming that they were going back to be involved in activities, and all of them, more than 62 actually, they were rearrested and they were getting back their old sentences that in some cases were life sentences.
Yeah, so they're actually making these mass arrests in order to create bargaining chips for future negotiations. I want to ask you one last question. Can you give us an example of the kind of protest that is happening around the world during Palestinian Prisoner Day? What kind of shows of solidarity can people participate in countries outside of Israel-Palestine if they want to support the prisoners?
Of course, usually on the 17th of April, and actually in all the month of April, it's the Palestinian Prisoners Day. So activists, pro-Palestinian activists and solidarity movement, they show solidarity via demonstrations or visuals or short videos that they distribute or other different activities. This year we launched a call to show solidarity as well by sending letters for the UN or the MPs all over requesting more sanctions in order to make Israel and enforce Israel to respect international law and to release especially on the level of administrative detention and human rights defenders cases. So I hope that till the end of the month, more and more solidarity support activities would take place all over.
So thank you very much, Sahar, for speaking with us.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching the Real News Network.